Growing number of countries flock to Russo-Asian economic, political blocs. While Western countries seem rather eager to try to cut Russia off from their economies, a growing number of nations from other corners of the world appear just as eager to gain greater access to the Russian economy by signing on to organizations like the Eurasian Economic Union. The veritable economic war unleashed by the US and its allies upon Russia over the ongoing conflict in Ukraine has, among other things, resulted in a development that US strategists likely did not anticipate. Rather than see its economy crumble and begin to mull surrender, Moscow has weathered the onslaught by the West and instead moved to deepen economic cooperation with Asian, African, and Latin American countries, i.e., nations that comprise the so-called Global South. Chris Devonshire-Ellis, chairman of Pan-Asia business management consulting firm Devonshire and Associates, told Sputnik that events such as the currently ongoing Eurasian Economic Forum may in fact be laying down the structure of the great changes Chinese President Xi Jinping told Russian Vladimir Putin about during their meeting in Moscow earlier this year. Pointing to international organizations such as the BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, EAEU, Eurasian Economic Union, NSCO, Shanghai Cooperation Organization. He noted how each of these entities has recently gone through expansion and development with increasing numbers of countries joining some or all of these organizations. Discussing the cooperation mechanisms between them is a complex issue. However, all are emerging nations with young populations possessing a dynamic mindset that global change is required. If the desire is there and the political will and freedoms are given opportunity, this is more likely to occur than not, mused Devonshire-Ellis, a seasoned veteran who has a 30-year investment and business career in China, Russia, and Asia. He also suggested that international investors should pay attention to the EAEU, a trade bloc that has largely been ridiculed in the West as being moribund and slow-moving, but which actually has been growing despite a difficult start. The main reason that international investors should take note is that it EAEU offers access to nearly all of Central Asia as well as Russia, and that it has a lengthy queue of other nations wishing to sign agreements with it, Devonshire-Ellis explained. It has nowhere near reached its full potential. Investors should be looking to get a foothold, adapt, learn and progress before the competition for EAEU market share starts to arrive. The developments and trends highlighted by Devonshire-Ellis take place as the economies of Global South countries gain power and clout. While Western nations such as the US and UK now have to cope with the fact that their economies may be a lot less attractive to foreign investors than they once were. Nvidia CEO warns chip war would cause enormous damage to US tech. The escalating chip war against China from the US could cause enormous damage to the American tech industry, said semiconductor giant Nvidia CEO Jensen Huang in an interview with the Financial Times published on Wednesday. Noting that China made up roughly one-third of the U.S. tech industry's market, Huang said there is no substitution for it. If we are deprived of the Chinese market, we don't have a contingency for that. There is no other China, there is only one China, Huang said in the interview. Losing the Chinese market, he said, would mean that U.S. semiconductor manufacturing facilities would be running at overcapacity and there would be enormous damage to American companies. As the world's most valuable listed semiconductor company, Nvidia specializes in graphics chips that have long been coveted by gamers but have become engines for the kind of complex computing power required in artificial intelligence, AI, processing. Since August last year, the U.S. has banned Nvidia from exporting two advanced computing chips to China. The ban covers the company's A100 and flagship H100 chips, which are powerful enough to facilitate AI processing. The company flagged a $400 million loss resulting from the restriction at the time. Huang said the ban resulted in the company having our hands tied behind our back when it came to trading advanced chips with China, one of its top markets. Huang noted that Chinese companies are making chips locally since they are cut off from the U.S. made ones. The recent growing excitement surrounding AI has been boosting demand for chips, with Nvidia having seen its market capitalization more than double this year. Shares in the company soared more than 25% Wednesday after an earnings report showed the AI trend is fueling demand for its sophisticated chips. Nvidia said it expected revenue of about $11 billion in the current quarter, which seemed to drive investor enthusiasm for its shares. Eurasian countries need own rating system, Putin. Major U.S. credit agencies have been accused of bias when it comes to assessing non-Western economies. The Eurasian Economic Union, EU, member states should establish a rating agency to provide adequate assessment tools for the region's growing economic activity, Russian President Vladimir Putin has said. The proposal was made during a meeting of the Supreme Eurasian Economic Council in Moscow on Thursday. Currently, the market for international credit ratings is dominated by three US-based agencies, Moody's Investor Services, Standard & Poor's, S&P, and Fitch Group. Countries outside the West have accused them of economic and political bias when it comes to assessing their markets. It would be useful to establish the Eurasian Rating Agency, Putin stated, adding that principled approaches and strict criteria are needed. It is important to guarantee that the work is absolutely objective. This is its whole value. If this is not the case, then there is no point in it, the Russian leader stressed. In addition, the president called for the development of industrial cooperation and an increase in the number of new joint ventures under the common trademark made in the EU. It is important that such a new brand become recognizable and gain popularity among consumers in all our countries as soon as possible, and the Eurasian quality mark on goods manufactured in the territory of the five countries means that products meet the highest standards, he stressed. Additionally, the Russian leader called on participants at the EU summit to develop common priorities for technological development, and create technological alliances with the involvement of third countries. Such associations could help set up new science-intensive and high-tech industries in the region, according to Putin. The EU, which is based on the customs union of Russia, Kazakhstan, and Belarus, was established in 2015. It was later joined by Armenia and Kyrgyzstan. This year, Iran sealed a memorandum on free trade with the bloc. The union is designed to ensure the free movement of goods, services, capital, and workers between member nations. Putin, Eurasian Economic Union supports pairing with China's BRI. The Eurasian Economic Union, EAEU, supports pairing with China's Belt and Road Initiative, BRI, to achieve the Greater Eurasian Partnership, Russian President Vladimir Putin said during an address at the plenary session of the Second Eurasian Economic Forum of the EAEU on Wednesday. Around 2,700 representatives from some 50 countries attended the economic forum that began on Wednesday in Moscow under the motto, Eurasian Integration in a Multipolar World. The forum is designed to look at ways in which BRICS, the EAEU, and the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, SCO, can be expanded and possibly integrated. Putin said the EAEU supports initiatives that are committed to developing the Eurasian region and will continue to work with China to promote the docking of the EAEU's development with China's BRI. He said the world today is experiencing revolutionary changes and that more countries are seeking to build a new architecture of international economic relations that is fairer and based on mutual respect and mutual benefit. He criticized U.S. economic policy, saying it is shooting itself in the foot by reinforcing a trend that undermines its own development. In this regard, he said Russia and its partners in the EAEU are interested in honest, productive, and pragmatic cooperation, noting that anyone acting otherwise damages the global economy. Putin then argued that the global economy will only benefit from the formation of a decentralized international financial system and that it's important to coordinate efforts to form such a global system. Founded in 2015, the EAEU is an economic union of countries located in Eurasia and consists of 5 member states, Russia, Belarus, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, and Armenia. Echoing Putin's call for a decentralized international financial system, Belarusian First Deputy Prime Minister Nikolai Snopkov said on Wednesday that Belarus plans to completely move away from the U.S. Dollar and the euro in trade with Russia and other EAEU countries by 2023. Currently, the US dollar and the euro account for about 8% of Belarus's trade with these countries, according to Snopkov at the joint meeting of the House of Representatives and the Council of the Republic. Finland gets flak from European Commission for skyrocketing debt. Helsinki's debt-to-GDP ratio has been rising steadily since the 00s. In 2022, Finland became the only country in the EU where it increased further. With the country entering recession, the debt problem poses an extra question for the future government that is yet in the works. Finland's ballooning state debt has prompted a reaction from the European Commission, which in its recent report called on the Nordic country to address it quickly and decisively. According to former Finnish Finance Minister Petteri Orpo of the Liberal Conservative National Coalition Party, who is leading efforts to form a new Finnish government, the EU study made it clear that Finland's situation, with a debt-to-GDP ratio of 73%, is much more dire than that of its Nordic peers. He said that he didn't want to compare Finland to southern European countries, which, he argued, have traditionally had a different attitude toward debt, insisting that Finland should be in line with the other Nordic countries and Germany. Last year, public debt exceeded the limit allowed by the EU in 13 member states. Furthermore, 3 of these countries, Finland, France, and Italy, failed to comply with the debt reduction target agreed upon within the EU. Finland notably became the only country in the entire bloc where the debt ratio of public finances increased last year. Valdis Dombrovskis, the European Commission's Vice President for Economic Issues, said the bloc was paying special attention to the 16 member countries that have a deficit of more than 3% or where the public debt exceeds the reference value of 60%. Dombrovskis furthermore ventured that these countries' economic situation doesn't warrant the excessive deficit procedures, which implies that the EU executive may potentially order member countries to reduce their public debt and deficit. Failure to do so may in worst cases incur further fines. EU member states have been allowed more breathing room to deviate from the general rules of the Stability and Growth Pact, SGP, amid the COVID-19 crisis and the conflict in Ukraine. However, stricter measures may be in store in 2024, when the bloc is expected to return to more conservative economic management. The European Commission issued country-specific tips to Finland on how to reduce the debt, which includes cancelling the country's massive energy subsidies in order to save public finances, reducing its dependence on fossil fuels and speeding up the use of renewable energy sources as well as correcting its labor and talent shortage. Petteri Orpo, the winner of the Finnish election and PM apparent, is a fiscal conservative who has pledged to cut unemployment benefits and other welfare programs. He specifically ran on the pledge to reduce the public debt, facilitate tax cuts and boost economic growth. Finland's debt-to-GDP ratio has been rising steadily for the past 2 decades, after dropping to 34.7% in 2008, the lowest point in decades. With the country having entered technical recession, the debt problem poses an extra question for the future government that is yet in the making. China ready to work with intl community to promote global trade, investment, Vice Premier. Chinese Vice Premier He Lifeng Wednesday said that China is ready to work with the international community to strengthen communication and exchanges, promote trade and stimulate growth drivers for investment cooperation. He, also a member of the Political Bureau of the Communist Party of China's Central Committee, made the remarks while addressing the opening ceremony of the Global Trade and Investment Promotion Summit of 2023. It is of great significance to hold the summit again this year, he said. The Vice Premier noted that China is now a force of certainty and stability in the world's economic recovery and international trade and investment. He said China will create more opportunities for the world through its own development. He expressed the hope that the global community will work together to accelerate international trade and investment and inject a strong impetus into global economic recovery. Debt ceiling negotiators relocated to White House to hammer out deal before June deadline. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen has warned politicians on both sides of the aisle that without an increase to the debt ceiling, the U.S. could default, causing catastrophic results for the U.S. and global economy. U.S. House Speaker Kevin McCarthy, RCA, told reporters on Wednesday that he was sending his negotiation team down to the White House to try to finish up the negotiations there, referring to ongoing debt ceiling talks. White House negotiators include Steve Richetti, Shalonda Young, and Louisa Terrell, and GOP negotiators Reps. Patrick McHenry, RNC, and Garrett Graves, RLA, who were invited by the White House to talk. McCarthy, who called his previous meeting with U.S. President Joe Biden productive, also told reporters there were a number of places we are still far apart, but added that he thinks we can make progress today. I'm hoping that we can make progress today. The talks began at noon local time and were still ongoing by 8 p.m. We've offered a lot of concessions. The cap on the spending is a Democrat idea, McCarthy said on Wednesday, referring to his party. The work requirement was a Democrat idea. I can't help it if the Democrats have become so extreme and now are a party of Bernie Sanders rather than the party where Joe Biden was elected. Joe Biden is the President of the United States. He is the head Democrat. But if Rep. Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez, D. New York, and Bernie Sanders are going to run their party, that's not my fault. I'm not even sure Bernie Sanders is a registered Democrat. Even as Congress faces a June 1 deadline, the lower congressional chamber is allowing members to break for Memorial Day weekend after votes on Thursday. The politicians will be given a 24-hour notice if they're needed back in Washington, D.C., to vote, and will be given a 72-hour review of the bill before voting. News that the House will be breaking for the upcoming holiday weekend runs contrary to a statement made on Tuesday by McCarthy, who said the chamber would stay in session for as long as it takes to pass a bill. I don't know how my colleagues across the aisle who voted for the Default on America Act are going to look our veterans in the eye this Memorial Day, House Minority Whip Catherine Clark, DMA, said, referring to the GOP's ceiling bill. Now you're sending us home with no resolution, Clark continued. That's the plan, to default, to run out the clock. Meanwhile, the panic of not having hammered out a deal has caused Fitch Ratings to put the US AAA status on a rating negative watch, causing the Dow Jones Industrial Average futures to fall 60 points. EU wants to send profits from frozen Russian assets to Ukraine, FT. The bloc is exploring uncharted territory, sources have told the outlet. European Union officials are considering whether to send to Ukraine profits generated from Russian assets frozen within the bloc, the Financial Times has reported, citing people familiar with the discussions. EU member states and European Commission officials convened on Wednesday to examine how they might move funds held at Euroclear, the world's largest settlement house, over to Ukraine, as Russian-owned assets there have accrued interest since they were first frozen. Targeted under an unprecedented Western sanctions campaign, the Russian assets stuck at Euroclear amount to €196.6 billion, $211.1 billion, the vast majority of which is owned by the country's central bank. As the assets have generated hundreds of millions in interest over the last year, the clearinghouse has reinvested those funds, and officials now hope to transfer the resulting profits to Kiev. It's not entirely clear who this interest belongs to, one person familiar with the plans told FT, adding that while passing the profits to Ukraine would be uncharted territory, the EU believes it could be done. Some European officials have called to extend a similar concept to a wider range of frozen Russian assets, including those trapped at Clearstream, a settlement agency based in Luxembourg, with another source telling the outlet that financial institutions simply don't know what to do with this money. However, settlement houses attempting to implement profit siphoning schemes are likely to face legal challenges, as Euroclear has already been sued by Russian asset holders. In March, the firm declared that it would not touch any profits related to the Russian sanctions until the situation becomes clearer, suggesting it could be hesitant to go forward with the plans. Russia's National Settlement Depository, NSD, has attempted to obtain permits to release the Russian-owned funds from European clearing systems since last year. However, such permits do not ensure that investors will ever see their money. given uncertainties about withdrawing procedures in the EU, as well as the bloc's designs on the cash. Moscow has called the Western attempts to transfer the seized assets to Ukraine barbarism and theft that violates international law, while the Kremlin has warned that Russia will respond in kind if necessary. EU officials will discuss the matter further during a meeting in late June, with the Commission recently saying that it is exploring ways to use frozen assets to ensure that Russia pays for the damages caused in Ukraine. Moody's outlines Russia's role in global economy. The country is still a dominant economic power, but its authority is challenged by Western sanctions, the rating agency says. Russia's economic pull in the Eurasian Economic Union, EU, remains strong despite geopolitical tensions and Western sanctions, according to Moody's. The rating agency, however, noted that growing uncertainty is undermining Moscow's role as a major diplomatic player and economic hub. According to the report, the conflict in Ukraine has led Central Asian countries to reassess their trade routes, export markets, and investment sources, as they seek to diversify. This could boost regional economic growth and transform labor markets, Moody's wrote. The conflict has repercussions on the world stage, especially in the ex-Soviet Commonwealth of Independent States, CIS, nations, it added. The report predicted that increased cooperation and infrastructure development between Central Asian countries will diminish Russia's central role, as more diverse regional trade routes emerge as alternatives to the historical hub-and-spoke model that links Moscow to the former Soviet republics. We expect Russia's diminishing power on the world stage to reshape geopolitical alliances in the CIS, particularly in Central Asia. China, the US, the EU, but also Turkey and Iran, will play an increasingly prominent role, Moody's stated. At the same time, trade between Russia and Central Asia has continued to rise, jumping by 28% in 2022 year-on-year, Moody's said. The report indicated that economic cooperation has been growing within the Russia-led free trade zone. Official statistics show that mutual trade between EU member states has reached a record high of $83.3 billion so far this year. The EU, which is based on the customs union of Russia, Kazakhstan, and Belarus, was established in 2015. It was later joined by Armenia and Kyrgyzstan. This year, Iran sealed a memorandum on free trade with the bloc. The union is designed to ensure the free movement of goods, services, capital, and workers between member nations. Worst yet to come for EU states on energy, Qatar. A warm winter has saved humanity and Europe from a severe energy crisis, Energy Minister Saad Al-Kaabi has claimed. A warm winter has prevented the EU from a severe energy crisis, but the worst is yet to come for the bloc, Qatari Energy Minister Saad Al-Kaabi warned on Tuesday, citing a lack of investment in oil and gas. Speaking at the Qatar Economic Forum in Doha, he claimed that an aggressive energy transition will discourage investment in hydrocarbons and could result in energy shortages in the EU over the coming decade. There's going to be a big shortage of gas in the future, predominantly because of the energy transition push that we'd say is very aggressive, Al-Kaabi warned. Economic stability and environmental responsibility are not mutually exclusive. You have to have both. The EU has been struggling with an unprecedented energy crisis following a drop in oil and gas shipments from Russia. The sanctions that the bloc has imposed on Russian energy imports have resulted in record high inflation and an overall cost of living crisis across the EU. The only thing that saved humanity and Europe this year was a warm winter and the slowdown in the economy, Al-Kaabi said, adding that if the economy starts churning back up in 2024, and you have just a regular winter, I think the worst is yet to come. He also urged EU officials to stop demonizing fossil fuels. If European leaders have a proper plan and sit down with producers, and oil and gas companies are not demonized, reality will kick in and we will have a sensible solution, he said. Qatar is one of the world's biggest producers of liquefied natural gas, and is investing tens of billions of dollars on boosting its production capacity. Biggest beneficiaries of Black Sea grain deal named. Over 30 million tons of grain have been transported since August, Turkey says. China, Spain, and Turkey have received the largest shipments of Ukrainian grain through the Black Sea corridor, the Millet newspaper reported on Thursday, citing the government in Ankara. More than 30 million tons of grain have been transported by 953 shipments via the route since it opened last August, the paper quoted Turkish Ministry of Commerce official Yusuf Karakas as saying. According to Millet, the amount of grain transported corresponds to 16.8 billion loaves of bread. Corn made up half of the cargoes, 27% was wheat and 6% was sunflower meal, a byproduct of the extraction of oil from sunflower seeds, Karakas added. Brokered with UN and Turkish mediation last July, the deal between Kiev and Moscow has allowed Ukraine to ship its corn, wheat, soy and other grain to international markets. The agreement was intended to stabilize global food prices and help countries in Africa and parts of Asia dependent on imports to meet their needs. However, according to UN figures, only 27% of the grain has gone to low and lower middle-income countries such as Egypt, Kenya, and Sudan, while 47% has gone to high-income countries, including Spain, Italy, and the Netherlands. Much of Ukraine's grain exports have ended up as animal fodder in wealthy Western countries. A February investigation by an Austrian outlet found that countries at risk of famine had received only 15% of the deliveries, while almost half the corn and wheat exported to the EU went to the makers of Spanish ham to feed their pigs. The grain deal was extended by 60 days last week. Data reveals Germany has entered recession. Earlier estimates had predicted stagnation in the first quarter of this year. Germany's gross domestic product, GDP, has fallen for 2 consecutive quarters, figures released on Thursday by the Federal Statistical Office, DSTATIS, have shown, meaning that the country has entered recession. First quarter output dropped 0.3% from the previous 3 months, after a 0.5% decrease between October and December, DSTATIS said, noting that its initial estimate, released last month, was for stagnation, or 0% growth. High inflation has persisted in what is Europe's biggest economy, forcing Germans to spend less, the Statistics Office explained. In January and February of this year the Consumer Price Index stood at 8.7%, dropping slightly to 7.2% in April, the official data suggests. This is still well above the central bank's medium-term inflation target of 2%. Energy and food prices in particular have shown above-average growth since the start of the conflict in Ukraine and have become the main contributors to Germany's high inflation rate, DSTATIS explains. The reluctance of households to buy was apparent in a variety of areas. Households spent less on food and beverages, clothing, and footwear, and on furnishings in the first quarter of 2023 than in the previous quarter, the release reads. Chancellor Olaf Scholz in January ruled out a possible recession, despite the economic impact of Western sanctions on Russia. I'm absolutely convinced that this will not happen, that we are going into a recession, he said in an interview to Bloomberg TV. We showed that we are able to react to a very difficult situation. Germany lagged behind other large EU member states and the EU as a whole in terms of economic development in the first quarter of this year. The EU overall registered growth of 0.2% between January and March. The country's central bank, the Bundesbank, said on Wednesday that it was expecting the economy to grow modestly in the current quarter, thanks to a rebound in industry amid a backlog of orders and lower energy costs, which would offset stagnating household consumption.